Okay, today we're going to talk about what's coming. I have no idea. Nah. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the day, and pray that you'll bless our time together this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I titled it What's Coming because we know that there is this, we talk about all these different things, the convergence of events, the things that are happening that indicate that the return of the Lord is getting closer. And the world does seem to be in a bit of a state of turmoil. And I was perusing, had a little extra free time this week, so I perused through some of the Facebook forums that I'm a member of, and I participate in a little bit. And I was talking to somebody else about, what we see on Facebook forum, and somebody goes, have you ever seen anybody change their mind in an argument on Facebook? And the answer is, I don't think I have either. So maybe maybe all those well-crafted arguments they're good practice, but not successful. But there's a lot of things coming. We always talk about the disrupted world. Remember that we put things up at rtntv.org, and there's an app also that you can get. And because I know that we're getting throttled a bit on Facebook, or on Facebook and YouTube. I put up a couple posts this week about things relating to the election, and immediately they get tagged with this, Joe Biden won or something like that, and the election results are disputed or not disputed. Whatever you're saying is disputed. So I thought, the other thing I've noticed too this week is that people are really scared because they don't know what's coming. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those issues, but I thought that I would read a couple of my favorite passages this morning to start out, because I think that we shouldn't be afraid. It's legitimate to be concerned. We don't know exactly where things are going. Things could get really rough. I don't think we're ever going back to what it was like in 2019. I just don't see it going back. And the leaders of the world seem to delight in confusing us and getting us angry and upset. So we need to keep our focus at Romans chapter 8. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called. And whom he called, them he also justified. And whom he justified, them he also glorified. What shall we then say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He that spared not his own Son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifieth. Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather, that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of the Father, who also maketh intercession for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And then over in Revelation chapter 1, John is writing he's on the Spirit on the Lord's day, and this is what he sees. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet saying, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And what thou seest, write in a book and send it unto the 7 churches which are in Asia, unto Ephesus, and unto Smyrna, and unto Pergamos, and unto Thyatira, and unto Sardis, and unto Philadelphia, and unto Laodicea. And I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks was one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. And his voice is the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, Fear not, I am the first and the last. I am he that liveth and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And I have the keys of hell and death. So we need to remember that Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father, and he is alive forevermore. And God ultimately is in control. And we need to be praying that that we act and react to things so that we glorify God in everything that we do. So let's look at a few things of what's coming. Now, this is sort of an annual ritual. The Economist magazine, published in the UK, always comes out with these little predictive things. A few years ago, they had what were like tarot cards, made-up tarot cards, predicting certain things, and they have pictures of people, and sometimes they're fairly accurate, eerily so. But I'm not saying that I think these are scripture or anything that you should follow. I find them interesting. These are business people that have some ideas about, because business people are always looking to see what happens in the future. If you go back to the world in I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's the one that has the Michelangelo guy. I know, this really makes you think of Michelangelo when I do that. By the way, somebody in one of the comments this week called me Hitler. I'm a Hitler. That was kind of a first. So that person won't be posting under that name on our YouTube channel anymore. But the one that had the drawing that Michelangelo did of a man, and it had some architectural. If you look at the 4 horsemen drawing that was there, the 3rd horseman is wearing a face mask. And I think that was the world in 2019 or 2020. That was kind of interesting. Now, I don't know what it means. I'm just saying, as you look, and there's a face mask on that particular horseman. Whether they knew something was coming or not, I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who think they knew everything that was going to happen. But here you see this year is a slot machine. And down here in the lower right-hand corner, it says, I'm going to have to take off my glasses to see that, insert stimulus funds. And then pull the handle. The world is on the handle. And you see things in there like windmills, dollars, graphs, bombs, syringe needles, people with emoji with face masks. You see a thing of Biden. United States broken. Probably that's not a prediction. It is a very strange world. This is a picture yesterday of Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, or Thursday. They actually had people weren't allowed near there, so there were people standing a block away watching it on their cell phones. And the parade was only like a block long or something. Things are so strange. I went by a store the other day to buy something, and there were 100 people waiting in line to get into the store. Trader Joe's. I mean, like, I'm not waiting that long to get into Trader Joe's. And other stores yesterday had lines, just because, not that there were that many people shopping, it's just that the store had a limited capacity. And so I saw places where there were 100 people waiting to get in a store. And I've seen that. I've never really gone out on Black Friday early, but I know that happens. But this was like in the middle of Saturday afternoon because of, limited store capacity. And governors continue in different places around the country to continue to lock things down. I have seen some of the most disturbing videos I think I've ever seen of people merely walking down a street with nobody around, without a face mask on, like a couple, and all of a sudden 6 to 8 police cars roll up, guys get out in helmets and full-face shields and drag them to the ground. And I see these videos all the time, and you'll see them from Ireland, you'll see them from England, you'll see them from the United States, and it's like, what is going on? And the people are saying, what are you arresting me for? And they can never tell them. This does not bode well for the future. Here's an interesting stat. More people died of suicide in Japan. This was from Fox News yesterday. More people died of suicide in Japan in 1 month than the entire coronavirus pandemic. I believe that in Japan, they had, now you can look it up on Fox News, if I remember the number correctly, that 17,000 people committed suicide last month in Japan. In the entire coronavirus pandemic, 2,000 people have died. And people are being driven to despair by these lockdowns. There was even a report. Here's the problem. We had a lot of company this week, and I was trying to do this, but there was so much information again that I could literally just stand up here and scroll through my browsing history. My browser crashed a number of times this week because I looked down and I had like 40 or 50 tabs open. Because I would just go from one thing to another. But one report I saw was that a lady she's like 89, she asked to be euthanized because she was tired of being lonely, because she couldn't have her kids around. And this is happening on a rather stark scale. Now, there is another report that was out, a Johns Hopkins report, that says that, now, Johns Hopkins is, in most circles, a well-respected medical university and school. Johns Hopkins. And they put out a report, a study of what they've done of deaths and reported deaths. And what they found was that the death rate now is essentially the same death rate as before the pandemic. Now, it's hard to find that report. You have to dig around on archive.org, on the Internet Archive, to find it because it's been taken down. It was so not even Johns Hopkins gets censored and restricted, and they were the place that sponsored the Event 201 war game on a coming pandemic back in October a year ago. It seems like October 5 years ago, but the one that we've played with, they were talking about a coronavirus that got out, and in their war game, 68 million people died worldwide. Well, of course, it's not even anywhere close to that. But now Johns Hopkins puts out a statistical report or analysis of the number of deaths that are taking place, and their conclusion is there doesn't seem to be a spike in deaths in terms of number of deaths compared to before the virus, and they get censored and taken down. It's insane. So there's a lot of controversy, remains a lot of controversy about these vaccines. This is the new cover of the new Newsweek. You first. And there's a growing resistance to it. In the United States, I believe the resistance, people who say they won't take the vaccine, at least until they see how it plays out with everybody else, is probably right around 50% now, which means that even if they vaccinate the other 50%, they say, well, that's not going to be effective. They need to have 85% of people vaccinated for it to be effective. And there's a lot of controversy about the nature of the vaccines. AstraZeneca has come out with a vaccine that uses aborted fetal cells in its manufacture. So there's a huge ethics problem with that for Christians to even take that one. They were touting themselves, we're going to get out there, we're going to be first. Ours is cheaper than a pack of cigarettes, but I don't know what a pack of cigarettes costs these days. And I see people going in. Some guy ahead of me once, he looked like he bought 2 packs of cigarettes, and she goes, that'll be $22.50 or something like that. But it's supposedly cheaper. It can be stored in a regular refrigerator, and it would be much easier to distribute. But now AstraZeneca is having to pull back because there's very serious questions about their trials and whether they've even conducted them properly. And there are, by my estimate, I looked at the number of people in trials, there's probably in excess of 300,000 people around the world that are involved in the various vaccine trials. Some vaccines have 68,000 people involved in their trials. But it's hard to get information about what people are having in terms of side effects and that type of thing. So it's easy to understand why people don't really want to take it. And then there are 2 modified messenger RNA vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer, but those have very serious problems with distribution, because they have to be stored at 70 degrees below zero. And even the Mayo Clinic said, we don't have a refrigerator that gets that cold. So I don't know how quickly they're going to roll these things out. They will try to roll them out. Some of the airlines have said, like Qantas has said, if you don't have the vaccine verification, you're not flying on our airline. I saw I'm always a little reluctant to use Hitler analogies or Nazi analogies, but I think it applies in this case. I saw a video of a Delta flight attendant. She said, if we have to tell you a second time to pull up your mask, you will be put on a list and you will never fly on Delta or any other airline the rest of your life. Have a nice flight. Now, what's happening is there's this corporatism, this corporate fascism. The governments don't even have to impose all these things. It's the corporations that are doing it. And they're blocking people from saying things. Like I said, every time you put something up on Twitter that has anything to do with the election or Facebook, you get a tag on it right away. Like, well, you really can't believe it. Personally, I think it's slander and libel when they put it up there just blindly like that, because they're saying you're not trustworthy. You're not allowed to do that. but they get away with it. So who knows what's going to happen with these vaccines? I think that if you're careful and you're not traveling, you're going to be able to avoid the hard decision on these things, and you're going to be able to see what happens to everybody else that takes them. And that's not to say that I think they're good things anyway. These things have been rolled out way too quickly. Way too quickly. Drugs and pharmaceuticals take years to roll out. And I will make a disclosure, okay? I have represented, early in my career, I did represent some major pharmaceutical manufacturers in litigation over side effects with regard to drugs. So I've been through all the rooms full of documents where they have all the incident reports, adverse incident reports, and the scientists and the doctors who developed them, and the trials, and the structure of the trials, and the statisticians have done all that. And I'm just saying this is way, way too quick for my taste. So I'm going to do today, I'm going to look a little bit at the election. So if you're not in the United States and you don't want to hear about the election, then you're free to move on someplace else. And I'm looking here, I have a video, excuse me, I need to put it into my presentation. This is assuming that I remember to edit the video and put it up. So there were hearings that took place in Pennsylvania this week with Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis and at the Pennsylvania State Senate about what happened in the Pennsylvania election. There was a lot of testimony given. The hearings went over several hours. I did watch most of them. I'm going to play you a clip of what they talked about, what happened in the election, if I find it here. And here is a hearing. Now, this is a gentleman, he's a retired Army colonel. He works in sort of a white hat security hacking firm where they analyze these things. So he's testifying in front of the Pennsylvania State Senate, and then you'll see Rudy Giuliani ask him some questions. I'm just going to play a couple minutes, maybe 5 minutes at most, of what he had to say, because I think we'll show you a little bit about what went on in the Pennsylvania election. These news reporters that say there's no evidence of anything wrong, they're either intellectually uncurious about anything and you should never watch them again, or they are lying, because there is massive amounts of information. As an aside before I get to this, Sidney Powell filed 2 lawsuits this week using local attorneys, since she's not admitted in Georgia or Michigan. And they alleged that, I think the Michigan complaint was 75 pages long. The Georgia complaint was 109 pages. There were a number of affidavits that were attached as exhibits to the Georgia complaint. Some of the affidavits, which had exhibits attached, in turn had exhibits attached to them, were 175, 200 and some, to even over 300 pages long. So any news anchor who gets on there, and here's what the funny thing was. She filed the lawsuits. It was Thanksgiving evening, overnight. And so I was looking at them at 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, along with news reports that said there's flimsy evidence. Now, there's no way that these little fascist reporters could have reviewed these lawsuits in that period of time, even if they've taken, Evelyn Wood speed reading? Even if they've taken that, there's no way they could go through and analyze these things. So there was a hearing on, I don't even remember the day, Tuesday or Wednesday at the Pennsylvania State Senate, and here is this retired Army colonel, 30 years in the armed services, talking about what he found in his analysis of some of the election information in Pennsylvania alone.
I want to share with you one chart. I believe it's in your package. So what our team has done is focused on the spike anomalies. And these are events where a numerical amount of votes are processed in a time period that's not feasible or mechanically possible under normal circumstances. I believe Greg Stenstrom mentioned earlier the processing of these ballots through machines. There's a manufacturer specified rate of speed that a number of ballots can be imaged and processed. These spike anomalies in this chart really show where for us to look forensically to actually determine what happened with these votes. Our team has looked at these systems, and there are a dozen ways to interdict the voting process in these issues, whether it's mail-in ballot manipulations. They can scan and allocate votes, blank votes, where there was 70,000 votes left in the back room. There's just lots of ways to interdict these systems.
When we look at this Pennsylvania fixing the vote chart that they all have, could you explain at the very beginning what that line means, Biden injection?
So at the very beginning of the chart, where there's a circle, it says on election day. What that indicates is there is a spike in loaded votes, 337,000 plus or minus of some votes that were added in there in one big batch. So that was an anomaly in the reporting. Normally you would expect to see a smooth curve going up, not any big spikes. That's kind of what Greg was talking about, the anomalies of loading and uploading those votes. So that big spike that occurs there is a prime indicator of fraudulent voting.
And that's 604,000 votes in 90 minutes, is that right?
Correct. This is 337 votes, 337,000 votes in that
period of time.
Yes.
And when you look at this entire curve with all these spikes, can you calculate how much of a vote that accounted for Biden and how much for Trump?
Close to 600,000. I think our figures were about 570 some odd thousand that all those spikes represented over time.
For Biden?
Correct.
And how much for Trump?
I think it was a little over 3,200.
Around 500 in this period of time. So the first thing he says is they can't process ballots that quickly. The machines don't have that kind of capacity. So now we have somewhere they were being processed, if they were being processed, without observers, which they're supposed to be able to have observers. And so over this 90-minute period of time, there were about 573,000 votes that came in, were added to the tabulation in Pennsylvania. 570,000 of the 573,000 went to Joe Biden. 3,200 went to Donald Trump. So is one of the issues. And then the other issue, I'll pick it up at the end of that and go into another issue.
How about that? Now, just to go back to your original document, this one pager that they all have. Mail-in ballots counted without being observed. Those are the ballots we were talking about that were not observed in Allegheny County and in Philadelphia.
Correct.
Is that right? 682,770. Now, this is the part that is a mystery. Mailed ballots sent out, 1,823,148. But when you go to the final count of the vote, there are 2,589,242 mail-in ballots. what happened? How do you account for the 700,000 mail-in ballots that appeared from nowhere?
So our cyber team uses white hat hacking techniques. They gather a lot of publicly available information, and that information was from the Secretary of State's website. That website has been updated as late as 11/16 this morning with provisional and mail-in ballots, so those numbers are still changing. They changed last night, so it's a continual target.
This is 22 days after the election.
That number, the 2.5 million number is no longer on the website.
It's just been taken off?
It's not there anymore.
Is there any explanation for why it's been taken off?
There was no annotations.
But has there been a change made in the 2,589,242 mail-in votes that have been counted in the total vote?
I'd have to check the Secretary of State's website as of.
And could you also check and see, is there any change in the 1,823,148 ballots that were sent out?
The mailed-out ballots number seems to be holding steady.
And was there any other method of producing ballots other than sending them out?
Not that we're aware of, unless as previous witnesses have testified that the potential for multiple ballot counts. So ballots could have been.
And have you ever gotten a chance to examine any of these ballots?
No, that would be part of the forensic process. One suggestion, whoever does the analysis is using paper and ink analysis with a micro photo spectrometer that would analyze the ink on those ballots to see if they were mass produced.
So in addition to the 682,770 ballots that were entered without a single inspection of any kind, there also appear to be something like 700,000 ballots, mail-in ballots, that were never sent out, that were counted.
There are noted discrepancies in the
That's
Secretary's
a pretty big
report.
discrepancy.
Yes, sir.
And that's been there.
That's on their Pennsylvania Secretary of State website. Well, some of the information was. So they sent out 1.8 million. As of this hearing, they had counted 2,500,000 mail-in ballots. And there are other affidavits that were submitted with these cases, folks. Listen, some of these are Democratic. There were Democrat people. They said, I cannot in good conscience not come here and tell you what I saw. I saw stacks of pristine ballots. Now look, if Pam Haller was here this morning, she would testify that John Haller, if he had a mail-in ballot, would never get from the mailbox to another mailbox in a pristine condition if he put it in his car. Because, I throw it on my seat, I throw all kinds of stuff on top of it, and it might be a week, and it gets a little bit messy in there. And it would never go back pristine, let alone hundreds of thousands of these things returned in perfect condition. These are things that are difficult to believe. And this is why, and half the people in the country believe this. So, whether Biden takes office on the 20th, a lot of people are not going to view him as legit. And I don't know that he will. So this is another lawsuit. So this is a lawsuit brought by Mike Kelly, Sean Parnell, and some other Pennsylvania state representatives. It was filed in Commonwealth Court, I believe in Pittsburgh. And what it said was, look, the state constitution of Pennsylvania specifically says that there are certain excuses that are legitimate for requesting and voting absentee. It's in the Constitution, and those are limited to essentially unavailability for certain reasons, illness, and disability. Now, what some of the Democrats argue was, well, people were getting sick from COVID, so that's illness. That's not how the Constitution was drafted, you lying morons. I'm sorry, it's just not the way that it was done. Now, I'm not sure if I was in court how I would say that. I would say something, that it's ludicrous. I think that's one of the terms. I think we can use those without getting yelled at by the judge. But so that's what the Constitution provision said. And so these guys said, look, we have to follow the rules. And so the election being conducted without following the rules is illegitimate. And it's unconstitutional. So they filed a lawsuit, and they asked Judge McCulloch, Patricia McCulloch, who was assigned to issue an injunction against certifying the vote and continuing to, counting these. And Justice Alito had issued a ruling at the U.S. Supreme Court level because it worked its way up to him early, and he said, you got to separate out the ballots. So she scheduled a hearing for Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. We're going to have a hearing on this, but in the meantime, I don't want the vote total certified or anything, and we're going to have a hearing. The Pennsylvania governor and Secretary of State, both Democrats, Tom Wolf, and I forget her name is in the complaint here, Kathy Brockvar, they filed an appeal. And so when they filed an appeal, the case stopped in the Commonwealth Court. But Judge McCulloch, to her credit, issued an order so that, because when they would go to the Court of Appeals in that circumstance, there's no order. And what they alleged in their appeal, you know what they did in their appeal or in their papers in response to this? They attached their press release about what a great job they were doing. I'm telling you what happened. So she issued this. So she said, listen, I'm issuing this order because I want the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court, to know my thought process. And so she said some things, and I think it's important that we see a couple things that she said. She said, essentially, she said that the petitioners appear to have a viable claim that the mail-in ballot procedure set forth in Act 77, that was the mail-in ballot law that the Pennsylvania House and Senate had passed last October, that it violates the Constitution. And she says, I think that's a viable claim. And then she said that the respondents say, oh, we're going to have irreparable harm. See, when you file an injunction, you have to establish certain things. The first thing to get an injunction, and I've done hundreds of these, okay, in different types of cases, you have to show the court that you have a likelihood of success on the merits. So she said, look, on the basic claim that this law is unconstitutional, I don't need a lot of briefing or anything. I could read the act and I could read the Constitution. They have a likelihood of success on the merits. Now, that doesn't mean you win. You also have to show that you'll suffer irreparable harm, and there has to be a balancing of the potential harm. So the governor and Secretary of State come in and said, oh, we'll suffer irreparable harm. And Judge McCulloch said, the legal term is baloney. There is no harm to respondents by the relief fashion, because she said, look, this all relates to the selection of electors, and there's a safe harbor provision that they don't need to have that decision made until December the 8th. That's a week from Tuesday. So she said, look, so she went through, it's a very well-reasoned period. She says, without the emergency relief ordered by this court, there would be the likelihood of irreparable harm to petitioners. That's the state representatives who brought this, who were running it for an election. As to Petitioner Cully, she just said, look, we need to have a hearing because there are certain facts that I need to determine. And then she went on and she concluded that, look, respondents claim, Respondents claim that a temporary stay would disenfranchise voters as the legislature would appoint the electors to the electoral college. But she said the legislature is not authorized to do that until December the 8th, the federal safe harbor date. So the court agrees that it would be untenable for the legislature to appoint the electors where an election has already occurred if, she says, the majority of legitimate votes can determine a winner. So essentially what she says is throw out all the improper ballots that you people allowed to happen. I don't care. You didn't follow the law. And if you can determine a winner from the votes that were cast and are legitimate, then we don't need to do anything more because we've thrown out all the bad ballots. So they appealed that, of course. The Secretary of State and the governor, and late last night, about 8 o'clock last night, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court dismissed the lawsuit. Now, the reason they dismissed the lawsuit is more, in my opinion, legal baloney. They said, well, you knew about this law, Representative Kelly, and the other guy, I saw him on Fox News this morning, a young guy. And you knew about this law. You could have done anything you wanted and filed a lawsuit about it up and through the end of April. Now, listen, I've been a lawyer for 40 years. I know a little bit about how judges think. You'll have to trust me on this one a little bit. If they filed a lawsuit with no pending election, and maybe even before they had to submit their name to be on the ballot, what do you think the court would have done? Get out of here. You don't even have a claim yet. You don't have, it's called standing. You don't have standing to bring the claim. And courts love this argument because, oh, you don't have standing? I just got rid of a case off my docket. I'm telling you, I've been around a while. This is how it works. And I'm not saying judges are lazy or anything, but they want to dispose of a case. So the Supreme Court, though, said, oh, you should have filed it sooner. And I can guarantee you with above 99% confidence that had they filed it sooner, it would have been dismissed back then because they would say, well, there's no election. We don't know that people are even going to vote absentee in great numbers. I mean, this is back in last December, they were going to file a claim saying there's going to be hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots. Nonsense. It's just nonsense. So there's one avenue. So look, here's the bad news. I think effective challenges, at least as much as I know, are pretty much done in Pennsylvania. The one Hail Mary that still existed was for the Pennsylvania House, the legislature that approves the electors, was for them to meet, especially in light of the dismissal, and say, look, we think our own law was not followed in a constitutional way. We're taking over the election. And we're going to appoint the electors in both the Senate and House in Pennsylvania are Republican, so you would think that they would select the Republican electors for president. So that would flip this state. However, in talking to some people that I know that are in the government in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania legislative session ends tomorrow evening. There are no plans to convene. They have filed a resolution to have the legislature convene, and the leader of the Pennsylvania Senate and Pennsylvania House, both Republicans, have said, no, we're not going to convene. We're not even going to consider the issue. Now, I don't know if they'll be able to persuade them to meet over the course of the next week or not. If they're not able to, I do not see any way that I know of. And believe me, I don't know everything that's going on, but I don't see any way that Pennsylvania is going to change. And I know that there's attempts that are being made to have hearings like they had in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Wisconsin and Michigan and Georgia, but I don't know how successful those would be, whether those legislatures, which I believe are all Republican controlled, would do the same. They may do the same thing as Pennsylvania. So it's a very long shot at this point, in my view. It's interesting that the people at the Council on Foreign Relations put out this article in their new issue. Now these are the sort of the globalists, Council on Foreign Relations and stuff. And so what are they saying? Now that the election is over, we need to figure out how to save democracy from technology. Well, where were you guys last year when the Democrats were running around changing all the rules over and over again? So that's bad news on the legal front. There's some good news on the legal front. This is, it's always interesting to see how they report it. People challenged the COVID restrictions on houses of worship, Jewish and Christian, in New York. And they got the case up to the Supreme Court. And in a 5-4 decision on, I think it was Wednesday evening, or Thursday evening, the U.S. Supreme Court voted 5-4 and said the restrictions imposed by Governor Cuomo and other governors on restrictions on houses of worship, we don't care what was ruled on a month or two ago in the Nevada case with the Calvary Chapel out there. You know, they argued, well, we're a church, you're letting the casinos open, why can't the church, which has a First Amendment protection, and the Supreme Court then ruled 5-4 and said, no, those restrictions are okay. Well, what happened in the interim? Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. Amy Coney Barrett took the seat on the Supreme Court. John Roberts revealed his true colors. And it's just like, New York limits on religious services blocked. Barrett casts key vote as High Court rejects state's ability to curb gatherings in the pandemic. And it's interesting, the journalists who, they're all First Amendment people, right? They never mentioned the First Amendment. It's like the court blocked it. They just did this out of the blue. Trump's mark on courts sets in. Conservatives split from Roberts. And I would say, yep, Roberts showed his true colors. So here's a copy of the decision. I found a nifty little graphic with the Supreme Court justices all with their face masks on. It was 5-4, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Thomas, Barrett, and Alito. On the one side, Roberts, Kagan, trying to remember the other guy, Sotomayor, and that other guy. Now I'm sounding like, do you remember Ernest Angley? I was watching him once. He's a faith healer from up in Akron. Had his own 747. Do you know that? I think it's been repossessed now, but remember he was preaching once. He goes, we need to be like the disciples. Robin Williams used to do a imitation. I mean, like all those disciples, like Peter and Andrew and all those other boys, he said. So anyway, so here is, here the opinion and the thinking around court watchers and everything is this opinion was written by, guess who? Amy Coney Barrett, the new justice. The applicants have clearly established their entitlement to relief pending appellate review. They have shown that their First Amendment claims are likely to prevail, same thing that was done in the other court, that denying them relief would lead to irreparable injury and that granting relief would not harm the public interest. Because of the need to issue an order promptly, we provide only a brief summary of the reasons why immediate relief is essential. And Gorsuch kind of took on Justice Roberts. He said the Chief Justice expressed willingness to defer to executive orders in the pandemic early stages. Even if the Constitution has taken a holiday during this pandemic, it cannot become a sabbatical. Very well-written, well-reasoned, excellent decision. But it shows you how fragile this is. This was a 5-4 decision, which means if anybody retires or the Senate seats get flipped to Democrat in Georgia, they're going to pack the court. They're going to increase so we know there's 5 conservative justices now that will vote to support the Constitution and the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and some of the other amendments. And there are 4 against. Roberts, whoever, some people still think he's conservative. I think he's pretty much not to be trusted. Let's just put it that way. And so so they'll say, well, we have 4. Let's increase the number of justices from 9 to 15, which means Joe Biden gets to appoint 6 right away. So he's going to appoint 6, add that to the 4. Now the decisions will be 14-5 the other way. And this will happen. I don't care what Joe Biden's said. Where he said, and maybe he doesn't know. I mean, they have plausible deniability that he knows what's going on. He actually gave a thanks. So there's these decisions, there's all this stuff going on. And what do I find in the mainstream press, like the Washington Post, New York Times? Do I find stories about these court cases? About what I don't think anybody's mentioned Sidney Powell in these major newspapers. But they did. Joe Biden issues Thanksgiving Day message for unity. He quoted, well, I'm going to play it. Listen carefully to what he actually said. Now listen, if you haven't heard this is the future president-elect. Sorry, I got a catch in my throat there. So here he is in his Thanksgiving Day address.
Let's commit ourselves to thinking not only of ourselves, but of others as well. For if we care for one another, if we open our arms rather than brandishing our fists, we can, with the help of God, heal. And if we do, and I'm sure we can proclaim the palmist, with the palmist who wrote these following words: "The Lord is my strength and my shield, and with my song I give thanks to him."
I forget which chapter of Psalms that is. It's on the teleprompter. Somebody said it's, how do you spell something if it starts with a P? You say, well, it's P as in Psalms. Or G as in Gnostic, Just think about it a little bit. And then this from Bloomberg Business. Joe Biden's start in the stock market ranks with any in history. Now, I think this is at Bloomberg Law. Who are these people? He's not president yet. He hasn't instituted one policy. You think the markets are all going up because they're pleased with how he cites the Book of Psalms? We're living in a very strange, odd world. Here's an article from Christian Today. Gay Christian campaigner calls for public inquiry into evangelical teaching on sexuality. In an article on Via Media, this person claimed that Orthodox Christian teaching on human sexuality was a safeguarding issue that should be the subject of a public inquiry similar in nature to the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. She said it was harmful to tell LGBT people that being in an intimate relationship with someone of the same sex was wrong and sinful. No word yet on whether she's been appointed to any policy positions in the new Biden administration. President Trump did pardon General Flynn, which I think was long overdue. It was, whether you like Flynn or not, what they did to him was just awful, and it ought to be frightening to any of us, because I know how these FBI interviews work, and they set this guy up. It was a put-up job, and he's paid the price. I see Carter Page has filed like a $75 million lawsuit against the FBI and Comey and struck those for abuse of his rights. Good for him. So this is a media release that came out of Victoria about a new law in the state of Victoria in Australia, which includes the city of, I think Melbourne is in the state of Victoria. And they have a new law banning cruel conversion practices for good. So what they want to ban is they want to ban anybody, so let's say a child is wrestling with her sexuality, his or her sexuality, a girl thinks she's a boy, and she goes to someone and they counsel her against it. That would be a criminal law violation in the state of Victoria, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. So if you counsel someone according to what it says in the Bible and what science says, you could go to jail and be fined. And if you tell the person, hey, we really can't counsel you here in Victoria, but I've got a pastor friend over in Sydney, that's punishable by up to 2 years in prison for referring the person when you know or are negligent in knowing that they will be counseled not to do this. Now, the language is interesting. Jill Hennessy is essentially the Attorney General of Victoria. She came out and said, we're going to ban the abhorrent practice of gay or gender conversion therapy. And here's the bill that was introduced, Change or Suppression Conversion Practices Prohibition Bill of 2020. Look at what some of this law says. Offense of taking a person from Victoria for a change or suppression practice. A takes another person from Victoria or arranges B to be taken from Victoria. A intends that a change or suppression practice directed towards B will be engaged in outside Victoria. A is negligent as to whether any change or suppression practice will cause injury, punishment, penalty, level 7 imprisonment, 2 years maximum, or fine up to 240 penalty units. I won't get into that. But the interesting thing was in their media release for this that I referenced earlier, listen to some of the things that they say. Now, understand what they're doing. They want to stop you from counseling someone not to get a sex change operation. There's a spike in this. It's up. We've talked about this over and over and over again the last couple of years. There's huge spikes, especially of young women seeking these sex change operations. They're being counseled to change their sex, but you can't counsel them to the contrary. So listen to what the self-proclaimed righteous leaders of the state of Victoria in Australia said. We're sending a clear message. No one is broken because of their sexual or gender identity. These views won't be tolerated in Victoria, neither will these abhorrent practices. Attorney General Jill Hennessy. The Minister for Equality, Martin Foley. Every person deserves to live their life safely and with pride. I wonder, does the Minister of Equality have anything to do with outcomes of sporting events? Maybe he was the guy who did the thing with Mike Tyson last night to a draw. That's equal, right? And I'm sure everybody's glad they paid big money to see that. Every person deserves to live their life safely and with pride. Putting a stop to degrading and dehumanizing change or suppression practices will allow LGBTIQ plus Victorians to do just that. Now listen, Mr. Foley, if hypocrisy was water for these people, the world would drown. Because what are they doing? They're changing they're cutting off body parts. They're the ones who are changing something that God designed. And they flip it around on everybody else who wants. It's hard to talk about. Here is Ro Allen, Commissioner of LGBTIQ plus communities in the state of Victoria. The alphabet soup Victorians are to be celebrated and valued just as we are. We're not broken and we don't need fixing. Well, you think they need fixing? Is that not what you're doing? You hypocrites. I mean, like as I said, if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. This is from Amnesty International, Conversion Practices in Australia. Now, if you want to hear Martin Iles, who works with, I don't know the name of the organization. It's like Christian Concerns in Australia. You can, Martin Iles, I-L-E-S, and he posted this on his Facebook page, what the state of Victoria is doing. And look at these. I mean, here's the things. What does a typical modern survivor of conversion practices look like in Australia? It says this, an LGBTIQA plus adult who has grown up in or joined a faith community. Oh my, look, there's a preacher there. Yes, preachers are evil. They're bad. We have to protect people against them. They're confusing people. Do you understand do you think this is going to stop in the state of Victoria? What's coming, right? What's coming is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will enact, and if they get control of the Senate, the Equality Act is issue 1, according to these people. And this is what's going to happen in America. And if you don't like it, you can go challenge it in court. Yeah, go to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and see how they protect your rights. Good luck. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of good judges. Here's some more panels on this. It just shows what they're doing to young. This is Amnesty International. I thought they were designed to get prisoners out of jail. And this is what they're into. And they have this published. You can see it right here. It's a poster that tells everybody exactly what they're doing. And I think I agree with Martin Iles when I see him say that, listen, this is what's coming, and Christians have to stand up and say, I don't care if you throw me in jail. I don't care what you do to me. I'm standing up for what's right. What did Paul say, or was it Paul or Peter? In Acts, we ought to obey God rather than men. There's a time where and we may live at this, that may be what's coming. And we may need to do that. This is another thing, and they had a big report on this, and they said, well, we need to look at religious liberties. I can tell you, I don't think there's anything in that law about religious liberties. But I'll have to go home and check. I didn't have time to read all of the 50 pages or however long it is. There's another thing that's happened in the United States. 4 Maryland challengers win circuit court seats. This is from the Washington Post. And the Washington Post said, listen, in Maryland, incumbents don't lose in judge races very often. Once you're in, you're pretty much in, unless you're really messing up or you get recalled because you're really messed up. But they had 4 Maryland challengers, all Democrats, defeat incumbents in Maryland court, like circuit court level, common pleas level judges. Even the Washington Post says, this is unusual. The unstated thing is they must have been funded by someone because these people are activists. Now, you know what that means in today's day and age. Let the prisoners out, go soft on crime, et cetera, et cetera. Because if you don't, you're racist. So this is trouble. Here's just a brief interview with, you can go to Fox News and get it, but Mark Levin on Life, Liberty, and Levin with one of my favorite authors and commentators, Victor Davis Hanson, the other night.
Victor Davis Hanson, you heard what I had to say. You see there's a huge rush by the Democrats, by the establishment Republicans, and by the media, and a lot of ignorance. Let's get this over with, and let's go ahead and coronate Joe Biden. How do you look at this?
Well, I look at the way you did, and for me it was, and I'm not a legal scholar like you are, but I'm a historian and observer of contemporary events. For me, it was always a constitutional issue, and that is the Constitution suggests, or doesn't suggest, it delineates the legislatures as sole arbiters of election law, unless the Congress shall intervene, and they haven't in this case. So there were the laws. They were clearly massaged, in some cases violated, and they had a difference because we're in a close election. The margins are very thin, and those violations may or may not, and I think that the inconsistencies that you pointed out show that there's real doubt about the election. And so that's the issue. And the left tries to say, well, we're 2 weeks and a half from the election, we're 3 weeks from the electors, whatever happened, it's happened. And there are some on our side that had a press conference, and I understand why they're concerned, but they said 70%, some of them have said Trump won, or millions of votes. And so our critics focus on that argument and not what you said, because that argument then suggests this is the greatest scandal in the history of the United States at a magnitude we've never seen. It may well be, but that's not your point. Your point is that let's find out if it is or not. You didn't say, I have proof of 70% landslide, or it's a big landslide, and that's why I wish people would concentrate on the points you made. What you're saying is, here's the Constitution, here's how even the people who violated it know that they violated it, and those violations have to be adjudicated because in a close elections, they may well have altered the result. And we have evidence that they might have altered the results because we have these affidavits, these inconsistencies, these unproven computers, and this rush to have mail and early voting because of the COVID lockdown. And so you're saying, take a deep breath, follow the Constitution. And I wish everybody on our side would stick to your argument, because what's happening, the critics are coming in and saying, you guys claim that it was a landslide. Where's the evidence it was a landslide? Well, we didn't say it. Maybe some people in their exuberance said that, but we were sticking to the Constitution and the violations and the ramifications. So that's, I think you're spot on. And I wish that people would codify their arguments in consistency what you said, because it's a very persuasive argument.
Now, in addition, what's troubling to me is the strategy of the Democrats. These were Democrats who brought these lawsuits basically to soften up the playing field, almost like a military operation. They brought in all the artillery, hammered, one court after another, one Secretary of State after another. It was obviously very well coordinated and networked by Mark Elias, one of their lawyers, Bob Bauer, one of their lawyers, who also have been involved in past activities with respect to changing votes and persuading courts and secretaries of state to change votes. And it's obvious they looked at 2016, Victor Davis Hanson, they said, that can't happen again. And they said, we have to change the rules. And they changed the rules, maybe in a score or more of states, particularly the critical states. And they had a plan set out to do exactly this. And in none of these cases were the changes intended to assist the Republicans. And none of these changes were intended to promote good government. None of these changes were intended to ensure the security of the vote. Quite the opposite. So I can understand, and I think you can understand, why people are really troubled by this, even apart from the constitutional arguments that I make and the litigation processes that I talk about. It's like, wait a minute. What are they doing? Well, in 2016, we knew the answer to who would be president at 2 a.m. in the morning. Now look at what's going on, right?
Yeah, and it's worse than that because it's 2016, 2020, but we're looking at 2021, and Georgia's the last readout, Mark, because the left has said that they're not interested in changing the policies as much as the mechanisms by which they make policy. And we had a heroic effort in the House, and we had a heroic effort to keep the Senate, and Donald Trump did a heroic effort. But the fact of the matter is, there's a good chance that our collective fates will hinge on those 2 seats. And if we lose those 2 seats, they're not talking about just nationalizing health care. They're talking about getting rid of a 232-year electoral college with its national voter compact. They're talking about changing 151 years of tradition with the Supreme Court. And they can do that if they get rid of the Senate filibuster. And then we're talking about the end of a 60-year tradition of 50 states. So once you have a 15-person Supreme Court, and we're within a hair's breadth of getting that, because we know what's going to happen. You can have almost anything if you have the House and the presidency and the representatives and the Supreme Court. And the danger is that this could be a replay of what we just saw November 3rd. We know what's going to happen. The polls are going to be massaging a incredible new blue state, Georgia. We're going to be told that. We're going to be told that Warnock and Ossoff are moderates, that they're no different than Bill Clinton's third way. None of this radical stuff is ever going to make it. The media is going to blanket it out. Big tech is going to deplatform, blue check, whatever they have to do. And the money that we saw in particular states is going to be nothing compared to the $1 billion that will come in from Mike Bloomberg and others. We've already seen people as diverse as Andrew Yang and columnists for the New York Times like Tom Friedman say, violate the law and move into Georgia and then stay there temporarily registered and then get out, basically. That was their implication, which is a felony. So what I'm getting at is that everything hangs in the balance now. There's no margin for error. And if we think that Georgia is a traditional red state anymore, it's had enormous changes in demography, through illegal and legal immigration, and its tech center, the suburban metropolis of Atlanta. That's 6 million of the 12 million people. And if we lose those 2 seats, I don't think you and I have never seen anything like the consequences in our lifetime. We're talking about structural changes to the Constitution as we know it and to the traditions and protocols of governance for over a century and a half.
That's what's coming. Listen, I would love to get up here and give you good news. I really would. But I have an obligation to tell you what I understand the truth to be and what, I can find out. And I'm concerned. So listen, maybe what Martin Iles said with regard to that conversion law down in the state of Victoria is you need to obey God rather than men. And Jesus is on the throne. I am alive forevermore, he said to John. If he was here today, and he is, I believe, but he says, I am alive forevermore. I have the keys. So we need to trust that. So a couple things. What we'll see is we will see the third term of this guy. Now, Sidney Powell did a great job writing her briefs. Look, there were typos in it and that type of thing. We're talking thousands of pages. My comment was, she wrote more in a short period of time than even Obama can write a book about his greatness. In a shorter time than he can write a book about his own greatness, which he seems to be putting out. So he has this thing called Promised Land, which is, excuse me, I have a cough button, but it's lost in my pocket, which is not pristine, by the way. I have my mask. It's sterile. I put it in my pocket, and put my hand in there, and sometimes I put it in my back pocket, and sometimes I put it on the visor, and then sometimes I find it under my car seat. So it's safe. Don't worry about it. I'm okay. But listen, in Promised Land, this guy, you can read about it at the Jewish News Service. He made up the history of the modern state of Israel. He said when the Balfour Declaration came out, Britain was occupying the Promised Land. It came out in 1917, and they didn't occupy it then. It was the end of the Ottoman Empire. He makes it up. He lies with the ease with which you breathe. So does Joe Biden. So does Kamala Harris. And sometimes I'll admit, even our president does it. You know what I mean? We need a truth injection. We need a vaccine against lying. I think people would have some pretty severe reactions to that one. But he makes this up. And so the big concern now is, what's Trump going to do to make it hard for Biden? Well, maybe he's going to do some things. I hope he does as much as he can if he's leaving office in a month, 2 months, 6 weeks or whatever, 7 weeks. I hope he does that. Did it stop Obama? Did Obama say, I wonder should I not do anything to make it difficult for Trump? He put his people all through the government. He launched investigations that never went anywhere, that never had affidavits with hundreds and thousands of pages of them and exhibits. It was all made up. He also, do you remember that debacle on Christmas 2016 at the UN where they would not veto, for the first time ever, they would not veto an anti-Israel resolution 2334? That was after the election. That was less than 3 weeks, maybe it was 3 weeks before Obama left town. He was trying to set it up. So, do it. This is another thing. This is an event that's going to take place. Dismantling anti-Semitism. This is the Alice in Wonder portion of the update today. Alice in Wonderland or whatever. Dismantling Anti-Semitism, Winning Justice. Tuesday, December 15th at 8 p.m. A panel discussion with Representative Rashida Tlaib on dismantling anti-Semitism. That's rich. Peter Beinart, who says, well, we really need to get rid of Israel. Mark Lamont Hill, journalism professor at Temple University, used to be a commentator on CNN. What does he think about all this? Caroline Glick writes about it. Here is Mark Lamont Hill on the day, the 70th anniversary of the UN vote on establishing the State of Israel. November 28th or 29th, 1948. So on that date in 2018, he's speaking at the UN, and this is how he ends his talk. At the time he was a CNN commentator, he got fired. He would not be fired today. He would probably be elevated to CEO of the network. But this is what he said at the UN, and listen to the reaction of the leadership of the UN that was there that day.
So as we stand here on the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the tragic commemoration of the Nakba, we have an opportunity to not just offer solidarity in words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you for your time.
See the Palestinian guy there in the chair of the whatever it was. Now, what the reaction to this was, he didn't mean get rid of Israel. Baloney. He did. I looked this up. Here's a Palestine will be free from the river to the sea t-shirt that you can get for your children. Caroline Glick talks about this in a great article at Israel Hayom. It was published on Friday. Justice and anti-Semitism you shall pursue. And she went through, she makes another, I have to read this, a little bit of this. Biden appointed Tony Blinken, who is Jewish, to serve as his Secretary of State. As John Kerry's deputy, this is the guy who's the new Secretary of State. Okay, so this is Obama third term. As John Kerry's deputy, Blinken played a major role in crafting the nuclear deal with Iran, which, while billed as a non-proliferation agreement, gave the world's greatest state sponsor of terrorism an open path to a nuclear arsenal. Like his former boss, Blinken is faithful to the view that the Palestinians are the strategic nerve center of the Middle East. Without their agreement, it is impossible, or if possible, wrong, for Arab states to make peace with Israel. Blinken is considered an establishment figure rather than an ideologue. But since he is a Jew, party ideologues view him as suspect. For instance, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. She's the first picture on the dismantling anti-Semitism poster. What does she think of Blinken, the new proposed Jewish Secretary of State who happens to be Jewish? She responded to the news of his appointment with an anti-Semitic tweet. Well, that's a good way to dismantle anti-Semitism. Bravo, Congresswoman Tlaib. Great job. Well done. I'm glad you exposed your true colors. Responding to Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders' praise for Blinken's appointment, Tlaib averred, so long as he doesn't suppress my First Amendment right to speak out against Netanyahu's racist and inhumane policies. Biden appointed Rima Doden, a Palestinian American, to serve as the deputy director of the White House Office of Legislative Affairs. A pro-Israeli website, Elder of Zion, reported in 2002 that as a student at the University of Cal Berkeley, and she must have been on the conservative side, I'm sure, of that university, Doden was the head of an organization called the Muslim Students Association, which is sponsored and founded and funded by, guess who? The Muslim Brotherhood. In that capacity, she gave a speech at a church in Lodi, California, where she justified suicide bombers. In her words at the time, quote, "The suicide bombers were the last resort of a desperate people." It goes on. She also notes that the Senate race in Georgia also involves things that people who have questionable views about Israel. For example, and I'm going to forget the name of the guy who's Warnock. He's pastor of Ebenezer Baptist, the church that Martin Luther King pastored in Atlanta. And he gave a sermon. I think it was last year. And here is what he said in the sermon. By the way, such words have never been heard other than playing somebody else saying them from the pulpit at Fellowship Bible Chapel. Here's what he said.
It's been a tough week. The administration opened up.
This is in 2018.
The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Standing there, President's family,
Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rav Yisrael,
and a few Mailin Ballots,
and all the ministers,
evangelical preachers,
members of the Knesset, members of the IDF,
who are responsible for the mess that we found ourselves
the
in,
executive branch of the United States government,
both there and here,
to welcome the leader.
Misquoting and misinterpreting the scripture, talking about peace. Meanwhile, young Palestinian sisters and brothers who are struggling.
Okay, that's the guy who's running for the Senate in Georgia. Okay? That's the guy they want to be the vote that puts them over the edge if they get him and the other person. Do you understand how serious this is? He came and said, oh, I'm not anti-Israel. And they all believed him. It's crazy. Caroline Glick in her article notes this. Maitland, Florida, Holocaust Museum now has a George Floyd exhibit. Quoting Caroline Glick, this week it was reported that the Holocaust Center in Maitland, Florida is now featuring a photography exhibit on the anti-police protests that followed the police killing of George Floyd in June. The message of the exhibit is easy to understand. The police are Nazis. Exit polls this month showed that, as always, a large majority of American Jews voted Democrat. The Progressive Rabbi's letter absolving Warnock for his hateful statements on Israel and the Holocaust Center's Holocaust trivializing exhibition are expressions of progressive Jewish accommodation to their party's new anti-Semitism. They have agreed to redefine Judaism as progressive and anti-Semitism as everything that isn't progressive. And if the Democrats express anti-Semitism and even build themselves up on the basis of such expressions as Tlaib and Beinart and Warnock do, then that's a good thing. For by doing so, they are actually dismantling anti-Semitism and winning justice. And so so when people criticize Warnock for what he said in that sermon, and by the way, the video and everything, that was lifted right from his church's website. I didn't edit it or any other, just in starting at a certain point. The criticism of him, what happened to the people who criticized him for that? You're a racist. You're a racist. Mealy-mouthed evangelicals misinterpreting the Bible. There are analogies that I could use that I would be called racist for doing. So it's just like when you criticize George Soros. Well, you're anti-Semitic because he's Jewish. No, I'm anti-George Soros. And I'm anti this nonsense. I'm just telling you folks, buckle up. Okay, I need to do a midweek thing. I'm going to just do a couple things here because there were a couple really important things that happened. So it was reported early in the week, and they had flight paths and everything, that Prime Minister Netanyahu went to Neom in Saudi Arabia, down there on the Red Sea, where they're building this big city, and he met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It's a pretty big deal. It was reported by a bunch of people. A Saudi Minister of Education reported that the meeting took place. Secretary of State Pompeo was there. He's not said who was there or not there. He had been up in Israel. He'd actually gone up to the Golan Heights, the first U.S. Secretary of State ever to go up into the Golan Heights. He then went down, he met with some other people in the region, in Bahrain and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. And then he went to meet with Mohammed bin Salman. They do have pictures of that meeting. For example, there is Secretary of State Pompeo and his aide with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The Saudi foreign minister came out and said, no, there was no Israelis attended the Pompeo meeting. The Hezbollah mouthpiece, Al-Akhbar newspaper in Lebanon, said, yeah, it took place. Now, that's a Hezbollah mouthpiece. They don't really like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia doesn't like them. They're Iranian proxy, and Saudi Arabia doesn't like Iran, and it doesn't like Saudi Arabia or Iranian proxies. The word that I've heard is that Crown Prince bin Salman is very nervous about admitting that such a meeting took place, because there are radical Islamists in his country that will kill him, try to kill him. And so he did not say that. But Al-Akhbar said, listen, over here, that headline in the middle there with the pictures says, swear by the face. And on the right here, this headline, you see Secretary of State Pompeo there and others. This is supposedly a meeting that took place on the tarmac down in Neom. A picture of it. and it said, the normalization train is accelerating. So that's a very interesting thing that they said, because my contention is this. Look, the normalization train, as this new paper says, if Trump is leaving, all these things are going to come into place, my view, more quickly than they would with Trump there. Because Israel's going to be backed in a corner. The Saudis and other Arab states are going to be backed into corners because they are scared to death about Iran. Iran is enriching uranium at rates far unseen. They keep putting up maps of their missile targets. They put crosshairs on people in the administration that they're going to take out. And so this is something very concerning. Here's another. They had multiple pages of articles in the very good article, the one here on the left. The title of that article, this is in the Hezbollah newspaper published in Beirut. It says, the article says, years of unspoken love. So what it says is that, listen, Mohammed bin Salman has wanted to do this for a long time because he loves Israel. These are extraordinary claims to be being made about someone who will soon be known as the custodian of the two holy mosques if he becomes king of Saudi Arabia. So there is a lot going on. There's proposals of a railway from Haifa across Israel to Jordan, from Jordan down into Saudi Arabia to bypass the Suez Canal and get trade there through Saudi Arabia and Israel back up to the Mediterranean. There's a lot of these things going on, and a lot of push for normalization. And believe me, this is an article from The Atlantic by Jeffrey Goldberg back in 2018. It was the first big interview that he did with an American publication, the Crown Prince did. And I'm just going to read you a little bit that came out of this interview, because I think it was very perceptive, and I remember referencing it at the time, but I don't think I understood the significance with the normalization things that we've seen going on. But he says this, Jeffrey Goldberg, Prince Mohammed, who is seemingly on an endless pilgrimage to the nodes of American power, is an unfamiliar type for Middle East reporters accustomed to a certain style of Saudi leadership, which is to say, the functionally comatose model of authoritarian monarchism. Prince Mohammed's father, the 82-year-old King Salman, now 84, is not overly infirm, but it's clear that his son is already in charge. And if the prince, his many handlers, and his partisans on Wall Street and in the White House, especially his fellow prince, Jared Kushner, are to be believed, he is in a genuine hurry to overturn the traditional Saudi order. The prince, in my conversation with him, divided the Middle East into two warring camps, what he called the Triangle Evil, consisting of Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Sunni terror groups, and an alliance of self-described moderate states that includes Jordan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Oman. About his Betnar, the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, Prince Mohammed said, I believe the Iranian Supreme Leader makes Hitler look good. Hitler didn't do what the Supreme Leader is trying to do. Hitler tried to conquer Europe. The Supreme Leader is trying to conquer the world. And then another thing that he said in that interview was that he said that Israel, I believe that each people, this is a quote, anywhere has a right to live in their peaceful nation. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land. Now, this is an extraordinary thing for an Arab leader of his stature to say. This has never been done, usually was in hushed tones. So listen, so the article in the Lebanese newspaper cited this Atlantic article and said, he loves Israel, he's been after this, and the normalization train is accelerating. So, and I happen to agree with that. I think it's going to come. Now, one other thing, and I promise that I'm done. An assassination took place in Tehran on Friday. And it was the head of the Iranian nuclear program. It made headlines all over the place. You see here the headline in the Tehran Times, Iran Daily, Khorasan newspaper in Iran with pictures of the scene. Haaretz, Iran's alleged nuclear weapons chief killed near Tehran. Israel is blamed. Here's the Jerusalem Post from this morning. Iran is vowing revenge. This guy was very, very important. In terms of the nuclear program, he was to the nuclear program what General Soleimani was to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is very significant. Netanyahu, if you remember back in, I think it was October of 2018, it seems like it was eons ago, when he did his little presentation on the Iranian nuclear program and the files that they had stolen from a warehouse in Tehran. This is very embarrassing to the Iranians. They got the number 2 guy in Al-Qaeda in Tehran a couple months ago. They get their nuclear guy in Tehran. They got the nuclear files out of Tehran. And the Iranian leadership does not like this. But here's what Netanyahu said about this Iranian nuclear chief back in 2018. And I'm just about done with this.
Iran devised a plan to do 2 things. First, to preserve the nuclear know-how from Project Ahmad. And second, to further develop its nuclear weapons-related capabilities. That plan came directly from Iran's top leadership. Here's another document from the archive. This is following the new directive of Iran's Minister of Defense, Mr. Shamkhani. Today is the director of the National Security Council. Following the new directive of Iran's Minister of Defense, the work would be split into 2 parts, covert and overt. A key part of the plan was to form new organizations to continue the work. This is how Dr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, head of Project Ahmad, put it. Remember that name, Fakhrizadeh. So here's his directive. It's right here. And he says, the general aim is to announce the closure of Project Ahmad, but then he adds, special activities, you know what that is, special activities will be carried out under the title of scientific know-how developments. And in fact, this is exactly what Iran proceeded to do. It continued this work in a series of organizations over the years. And today, in 2018, this work is carried out by Sapand. That's an organization inside Iran's defense ministry. And you will not be surprised to hear that Sapand is led by the same person who led Project Ahmad, Dr. Fakhrizadeh, and also, not coincidentally, many of Sapand's key personnel worked under Fakhrizadeh on Project Ahmad. So this atomic archive clearly shows that Iran planned at the highest levels to continue work related to nuclear weapons under different guises and using the same personnel.
And that's this guy, Fazi Saked. This is Javid Zarif, the foreign minister, talking about his murder. This is the Ayatollah Khomeini tweeting about this yesterday on his English account. One of our country's eminent scientists in the nuclear and defense fields, Dr. Moshe Fazi Saked, has been martyred by brutal mercenaries. With his great enduring scientific efforts, he sacrificed his life on the path of God, and the lofty status of martyrdom and his divine reward. And there are reports, too, in addition to that, Israel's been striking Iranian and Syrian things in Damascus and along the Golan Heights to prevent Hezbollah and Iranian proxies and Iranian Revolutionary Guard from making inroads into Israel. So that's a lot going on there. I'm sure we'll be going to talk about this. A lot of people are saying, well, Israel's just doing this or Trump and Netanyahu are just doing this to make it difficult for the next guy. Netanyahu's trial's been postponed. They don't have a budget. The Blue and White Party has threatened to dissolve parliament, which means that there are going to be elections in Israel again. It's like waterboarding the whole country, in my view. Can you imagine if we had elections a presidential election every 5 times in the last 3 years? And here's an article saying this, that the Crown Prince was reluctant to back any U.S. attack on Iran. There's rumors that there's going to be an attack on Iran before Trump leaves office, assuming that he's leaving office. I don't know. Seth Frantzman, close with this, has a great article about this map he has of the alliances that are forming that support Israel. Very interesting map. Go to sethfrantzman.com. I think this is also in the Jerusalem Post. You ought to read it. I'm just telling you, folks, there is a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East, in America, in the world. Lawlessness, vaccines, lockdowns. What's coming? Well, more of the same, but I know this. Eventually, Jesus is coming, right? That's something we can get excited about. So let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. Pray that you will bless us this week. Give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us. Lord, keep us mindful of your promises, of the fact that Jesus is alive and in control and coming back. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.